Hello and welcome back. I've got so many fun things to share with all of you today. We are going to be doing that tutorial for the friendly neighbor block that I promised last week. I've got a whole bunch of blocks that I made this past week. I'm going to be showing that. A really sweet viewer share sent in, so we're going to be kicking off with that. We are unboxing the Nantucket Summer Project bag, and I've got a bunch of show and tell quilts that you can't see here that tie in perfectly with our topic today. So lots of fun to share. Stick around. Let's start off with this viewer quilt share. This one just came in recently, and it talks about the down home quilt, which I was going to be talking about today already. But then when I read through the story, I thought, oh yes, this is the one that we need to share today. So one quilt share today, but it's such a good one. It was sent in to us by Michael T, and it starts off, "Hello, Nicole and Corey. Huge fan of yours, your fabrics and patterns. I needed a baby quilt, and I love your down home pattern. I'd never made a Sawtooth Star or Ohio Star, but I just love star quilts. I was an avid quilter before I became paralyzed 7 years ago. I thought I would never be able to quilt again. My physical therapist actually modified a foot pedal mechanism into a handheld pedal. I can still use variable speeds and use both hands to work on the sewing machine. Please forgive the errors in points meeting up perfectly. I sure did learn a lot during this pattern. I hope you enjoy looking at it. I modified your pattern by adding a 5-inch border. So looking forward to making something using your new flannel line. God bless and see you Saturday for my weekly quilting inspiration. Respectfully, Michael T, the wheelchair quilter. P.S. If anyone has questions about my handheld device, let me know. Thanks again." And then he sent in those two photos of the full picture of the Ohio Star quilt. That's the down home quilt pattern, and then one with him in the picture too, which I just love that photo. And Nicole and I try to respond when we receive these viewer quilt shares. We do better sometimes than others, depending on which email is used. Sometimes you get a response from me, and sometimes you get a response from Nicole. We do our best to answer those. Hopefully at some point in time you get a response when you send those in. And so Nicole responded back to Michael. I'm going to read what she said to him. She said, "Wow, just wow, this turned out so beautiful. And with the added challenge of a handheld pedal, you are an inspiration for sure. The colors you chose are so bright and cheerful. I'll forward this to Corey. I just wanted to make sure it would be okay if she were to feature it in an upcoming YouTube video. Have a wonderful and blessed week." To which Michael responded back, "Hello, Nicole. Thank you so much for the compliment. I loved quilting even before my accident left me paralyzed. I thought it was over for me until a physical therapist's husband turned my foot pedal into a handheld device. I've had to relearn a lot, and I'm not as steady as I was before, but I can quilt again. It's so good for my mental health and depression. If Corey would like to show my pictures and tell my story, I would be honored. I'm such a huge fan of hers. She's my favorite quilter on YouTube. I've attached a full-length picture of me on vacation in Florida. If my story can encourage even one person, then that's a special gift to me. Sincerely, Michael T, the wheelchair quilter." And then he sent that photo of himself in Florida. And I thought that was just a story that we all needed to hear. Thank you so much, Michael, for sending these photos in, for sharing your story. And I know that it's going to encourage some other quilters out there. I know it was such a treat for me to see. We've chatted a few times here and there, sometimes in the comments of videos, sometimes via email or other spots. And so I was really excited to see that and to hear more, to hear more about your story. So thank you so much for sending those in. It's so neat that you guys send those photos in. They bless Nicole and I, and then we get to share them with all of you. So thank you again. That was so fun to be able to share with everybody. So I know that the rest of this video can't top that, but that's such a fun way to kick things off. We are going to move right into some quilt blocks that I worked on over this last week. I had mentioned in my studio tour that I was working on a quilt for the upcoming In the Garden fabric line for the project bin that comes out within the garden. This is the Nantucket Summer project bin, and we're going to open this and look what's in here. I haven't opened this yet. I thought it would be fun to do that with all of you. So I am working on my quilt for the In the Garden bin. So what these are, they are special little project boxes that come out with the fabric line. So in my instance, with In the Garden fabrics, which come out later this fall, I have one of these coming out. It includes an exclusive pattern that's only available in the bin. It includes a really fun specialty pre-cut, an 8-inch by 8-inch stack of 20 squares, so an exclusive pre-cut that you need to make that exclusive pattern, and then a bunch of goodies that I got to choose to put in the box. So it's a really neat project. They're not available for every line that comes out in a season, and I don't know if I'll ever have another one. So you have to take advantage of it when it comes out. They will be in quilt shops. I don't plan to have any in my Etsy shop, so you'll want to support your favorite quilt shop to purchase one if you decide you want to have one. The pattern that I have for this box is Plentiful Stars, and I just finished up all of my Plentiful Stars for this quilt. So now I just need to add my sashing and then also my borders. But I thought I would show some of these to you. I have all of them but one on my stack because I have one over there on my design wall, which was the first one that I made just to test my pattern. And so after testing, then I was able just to go through and make these cute little stars. These were a lot of fun to make. I love the happy, bright colors of the In the Garden fabric line. And yeah, it was just fun. So I just sat and sewed quite a bit last week working on these little cuties. And I thought I'd show you them here. So this quilt pattern, let me see, I'll tell you what size it's going to finish at. 48 by 56. So just a throw-sized quilt pattern. Of course, if you wanted to, you could make it bigger by adding more borders. That's always an easy way to make a quilt larger. But those are all of those happy, scrappy, Plentiful Star quilt blocks, turning out so cute. I will also tell you, I included on this pattern the skills that you would be using to make Plentiful Stars. So you will be needing your accurate 1/4-inch seam allowance, you'll be doing rotary cutting, a lot of flying geese, and then small pieces. So with my fingers here beside some of these pieces, you can get an idea of the scale of some of the pieces that you're working with. So small pieces as well. Next, I will need to sew these all together, but they've been really fun to work on. I was able to push this project back just a little bit because I didn't need to have it done quite as quickly as the rest of my In the Garden quilt patterns. So it's been a fun little summer project. Those fabrics are just so perfectly summery and happy. All right, so let's take a look at this Nantucket Summer box. Again, if you got or are getting the Nantucket Summer box and you want to be surprised, now is your chance to fast forward for this little section here so you don't accidentally see something that you don't want to see. But we're going to go ahead and open this up and see what Camille included in her box. So this is what the box looks like. And let's just open it up. This is also a really nice sturdy bin. You're going to be able to use that for other things too, which is wonderful. All right, this is what it looks like. Here is that cute little special pre-cut. So those are 8-inch squares, 20 of them. And that's adorable. We also have a Nantucket Summer mini charm pack. And oh, it looks like the cutest little coin purse. Let's open this up if we can without too much crinkle. Oh, maybe I'll leave it closed. I'm just gonna leave that closed. I'm gonna open up that later. But it's just a little coin purse that perfectly matches. We have quilt labels. Those are adorable. It looks like there's 3 of them in there. I'm gonna see if I can open those up. Sometimes opening things on camera can be a little tricky. The paper gets loud and sometimes things just don't open as smoothly as you want them to, but I know we want to see what these are. Let's lay these over here. So we have a little heart one there. Looks like that. Ryan's really gonna have to zoom in so you can see that. Made with love on the back of that one. this little guy here, so a longer rectangle. And that one says handmade on the back there. And then a little swoon block quilt label, that's adorable. And that one, of course, says swoon on the back. So those are little quilt labels. Adorable. You could tack those on to your quilts, or you remember I added something very similar to those onto my little project pouch that I made a couple of weeks back, that tutorial I shared. Oh, we have a wonderful sewing scissors. That looks like a good one. Little scissors there. It's nice and weighty. It's not a lightweight scissors. A sticker, perfectly appropriate for this box. And then we have a mini piece catalog. Let me just browse through here real quick just to get an idea. Okay, so it's all about all kinds of things Camille Ross Kelly. There's a lot of fun information in there. That's going to be really fun to read through. Lots of pattern information, lots of photos. It looks adorable. And then the pattern that comes with is called Nantucket Baskets. And that is going to use those 8-inch squares, these here. And then we have, oh, this is wonderful. This is a journal set. Isn't that pretty? So it's a 2-piece journal set. This is one print, and then that is the other print. And then last we have, oh, little charms, and I think that's a charm bracelet in there. Should we open that up too? I don't know how much you want to see this in detail. I don't know how familiar you are with these project boxes, but these are really neat. This is going to be a fun little series that Moda is doing, and this is adorable. Okay, so we've got a little bracelet there, and then the charms that are included is a little ribbon charm and then a little spool charm. So you could, in theory, if you are collecting these bins from the different designers, you could collect a whole bunch of cute little charms. These are going to be included in with every box, these little charms. So you could have such a cute little sewing themed charm bracelet, or maybe not even sewing themed. It might just be something cute. I know what I chose for my charms. Not necessarily sewing themed, but things that are very appropriate to go along with the box. So that is what's included in here, and that is fun. So the In the Garden bin will be coming out later this fall, again in quilt shops, and it includes those exclusive goodies that are only available in the project box. So just a really fun project to work with Moda on, and I hope that you guys all love these as they start coming out. All right, we are going to move into that friendly neighbor tutorial portion of this video. I need to get my cutting table set up. I've got all my pieces cut out, so we're gonna move the pieces over here and dive into that tutorial. Got my cutting mat set up with all of my pieces cut out to get started on this tutorial video. Last week I had mentioned that I was going to be sharing a tutorial on how to use the Bloom fabric line in place of the apricot and ash fabric line that I used in my original Friendly Neighbor quilt. The two fabric lines are sister collections, so the colors are very similar. Bloom has that beautiful aqua added in that apricot and ash did not have, and the apricot and ash panel is a different size than the Bloom panel, but that doesn't mean that we can't swap the two panels. We just have to make a little bit of adjustments to use the Bloom panel. Bloom, this is the panel that I designed for that collection. You guys have seen me using it here. It is made on 42-inch wide fabric as opposed to the 60-inch wide fabric that I used for this panel. So they are a different size, but we're still going to make it work, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So this is the Bloom panel, and we'll make the adjustments needed to use this panel in place of apricot and ash panel. The other question, I should have written down who sent this in to me. I don't remember who it was. They said, I love the idea of using a panel in the center of blocks like what you've done in the Friendly Neighbor quilt, but I don't necessarily want to make a house quilt. Could I use that in the center of other quilt blocks? And if so, can you give me some examples? Yes, you absolutely can. And that's how I love, that's what I Oh, why can't I talk today? That's what I think of when I think about using this panel. So I'm going to show you, after I walk you through this friendly neighbor tutorial, I'm going to show you some different options for using the panel in other places. So stick around to the end of the video for that portion. All right, let's talk about these pieces that I've cut. You will need a friendly neighbor quilt pattern because I am not giving measurements in this tutorial. Rather, I am showing you how to put the pieces together once you already have the pattern. So this is the friendly neighbor pattern. It's available in both paper and PDF versions over in my Etsy shop and linked in the description box. Now, I have not made one of these blocks for a little bit of time, so we are just going to work our way right down through this pattern. On page 3 of the pattern, you're going to see exactly the prints that you need for everything that is a print and not a solid. So you're going to cut all of those pieces. And then I also cut out, I needed just a few of my background fabrics, so I cut those out as well. So I've got everything I need here for one block. Now, with the panel, when you look at the cutting instructions on page 1, you're going to see that you would be cutting your panel to 8.5 inches square. We cannot cut the bloom panel that large. There's just not enough space to cut it that large. So instead, we're going to cut it smaller, and then we're going to add borders to bring it up to that 8.5 inch measurement. I have cut my panel at 6.5 inches square. This is the smallest size that you are going to want to cut any of these squares from, and you won't be able to cut quite all of them at that size. I think there are at least 2 where your seam allowance just gets a little too narrow if you cut at 6.5 for the entirety of the panel, but you can cut nearly all of them at 6.5 inches. And for this pattern, you do not need all of the panel squares in your panel. You only need, I think it's 16. Is that right? Let me make sure. 16. You only need 16, and there are 20 total. So choose your favorite 16, cut those at 6.5 inches square. And then to bring that up to the size that we need, we are going to add borders. There are 2 different ways that you could approach this. You could add white borders. If you wanted to do that, I would suggest the color 9900-200. That's Motabella Solid in the color Off-White. And that is basically going to just extend the white portion of the block out further. So it's going to look like you have your stitched panel motif kind of floating in the center with just a white edge. The other way that you can add the border is to choose something colorful, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I've chosen this bird fabric right here from a bloom, and that's what I'm going to use to frame out my panel square. So these are cut at 1.5 inch by 6.5 inches. I'm going to sew those to both sides of my panel, and then I have 2 rectangles that are cut at 1.5 by 8.5, and those are going to get sewn to the top and bottom after I've sewn the side pieces on. That's going to give me a center square of 8.5 inches, and I'm just going to go ahead and get that sewn. And just like that, we have our 8.5 inch panel square ready to be used now in the center portions of these blocks. Now, when you look at this, the reason I said that some of those panel squares, there's just a couple that aren't going to work, is you can see how close the motif runs to the edge of the quilt block with that 1/4 inch seam allowance, and some of them run just a little bit further out. So when you're cutting them down to 6.5 inches, you just won't have quite enough space. You'll cut off just a little bit of your motif. There were at least 2. I was double checking all of the blocks yesterday just to see how many of these can we actually cut down to 6.5 inches square. There were at least 2 that I encountered that I thought, oh, I don't know if I would want to use those. Now you could always just go a little scanter on your seam allowance if you wanted to utilize those blocks with the 6.5 inch size. So keep that in mind, but just something to be aware of. So this is what the block looks like. You can also picture here what it would look like had I used white for this border section. You would have the little stitched motif here in the center and then just white around the edges, which is also a pretty option. We are ready now to continue with the remainder of the piecing. We're just going to follow the pattern from here on out, just like it says. We just had to make that one change to make those blocks just a little bit bigger than what they would have been without that border. So starting in step number 1, we're drawing a diagonal line on the wrong side of a K square. That's these little guys up here. And I have already drawn all of my diagonal lines on those. And we are going to be using the stitch and flip method, which is outlined on page 2. So if you need a picture reference to what that stitch and flip method is, sometimes we call those snowball corners, sew and flip, easy corner triangles. There's so many different names that refer to that same technique. You can refer back to page 2 in your pattern. So using the stitch and flip method, we are sewing K to the right end of A. These are our A rectangles rather, up here. And we are going to be, it said, making 2 of these. Sew K to the right end of A to make an A unit. Press your seams open and you make 2 A units measuring, and the measurement is listed here. It's always a great idea to check those measurements I provide in my patterns every step of the way to make sure that everything is measuring as it should. So we are taking these, you can see the illustration here, we're placing K on the right end. Make sure that your diagonal is going the same direction as what is pictured in the pattern. You're going to sew on that marked diagonal, press out, make sure that all of your raw edges align, and then you're going to trim out those bottom 2 layers. You're going to be making 2 of those with K placed on the right side, but then you see here in step number 2, you're making 2 additional units. You're placing K on the left side. So the reverse unit is going to be sewn like this, where you have your diagonal running here, and then you are placing it on the left side. So you'll make 2 like this, 2 like this. That's steps 1 and 2, and I will get those units all made. This is what these 2 units look like now. So this is the A units, you can see those right here, and then the reverse A units right here. Next, we're going to sew 1 of each into a pair, which we see here in step number 3. So we're going to take 1 of each like this. Actually, the illustration is like this right here. You can see it makes a valley right here. So we're going to sew these 2 pieces together. We're going to make 2 pairs. We're going to do the same thing with both of these. And then I'm just going to move right into step number 4 as well, because we're just going to be doing the same thing that we did with A and K, but we're going to use B and K. You're going to see this happening on page 4. And we are going to be making 2 B units where we place K on the right side, and then we're going to be making 2 reverse B units where we place K on the left side. Again, pay attention to the rotation of your marked diagonals so that you get those sewn accurately. Double check your unit measurements as you're working through. Same goes for when you're sewing these 2 pieces together. You have that unit measurement listed on page 3 so that you can easily make sure that you are sewing accurately as you work through the pattern. So I am going to sew together these pieces here, and I'm also going to do my stitch and flips here for these B units. These are what the A units look like sewn together. And then I went ahead and sewed the B units together as well. And that takes us all the way through step 4 of the pattern. The next step, step number 5, we are now sewing these units to the sides and top and bottom of the panel. These shorter ones are going to go on both sides here. And then the longer ones are the top and bottom pieces. So that's how that is going to come together. You're going to see your pressing instructions listed. You're pressing towards the center when you are sewing these portions onto the center of the block. You can also see that denoted by the arrows here in the pattern. And then you're going to again get that block measurement listed in step number 5 so you can double check your sewing. I'll get these all sewn together and show you what that looks like. And look how cute. It's really shaping up nicely. That's where we're at right now for that portion of the quilt. And then I wanted to show you the back too, just so you can see the pressing. Just following the pressing instructions throughout the pattern. And as I was sewing this together, I thought it would also be pretty. I had mentioned using a contrasting border for this fabric, using a white border for this fabric. Alternatively, if you were to use the same print for this piece right here, that would just sort of create a really pretty, almost flower effect, framing out that whole center portion. And that could be a really pretty option as well. So we are going to just set this to the side. We're going to move on to step number 6. We need our C rectangle, which is this piece right here. And then we also need, what is it, an L. We need an L, and we're going to be doing another stitch and flip right here on this side. You're going to sew just like you did these smaller sections. Sew on your marked diagonal, press everything, make sure your raw edges all align, and then trim out those bottom 2 layers. And you can see what this will measure here in step 6, so double check that measurement. Once you have this unit created, you are then going to sew it to this block right here that you created. It's going to get sewn to the top. This is what the block looks like at this time. We can set this to the side because we're going to start working on the other side of the house. And that is going to be happening starting in step number 8. I'm actually going to do these next few steps here kind of at the same time. We're going to start with E. We are adding D to the top right, which is this guy right here. This one I have not drawn my diagonal line on the back of, so let me just go ahead and do that right now. So draw the diagonal line. If you have diagonal seam tape you want to use in place of drawing a line, by all means go ahead and do that. Or if you have a different stitch and flip method that you really like using, you should always use the techniques and tools that work best for you, because it's going to be different for each one of us. There is my diagonal line on the back of D. You see this here in step 8. You're going to sew on the marked diagonal, stitch and flip units once again. So then we'll press away, make sure all of our raw edges align, and then trim out those bottom 2 layers. After you've completed the right side, you're going to do that same step on the left side. You see it all happening here in step 8. So sew your D square, and then once this is all pressed and trimmed, then you're going to bring your L square, and you are going to do the same thing on the left side. And then sew on that marked diagonal, press that out, make sure everything lines up, trim out your bottom 2 layers, and that is going to result in this little unit right here. After you've completed step 8, you can move to step 9. Step 9 is pretty straightforward. You are just sewing together 2 F rectangles, these right here. Move some of these out of the way here. So you'll be sewing together 2 F rectangles and your G rectangle, which is right here. So these 3 pieces will get sewn together like so. I am going to do both steps 8 and 9 right now and show you what those completed units look like. These are the 2 pieces that I've just constructed in steps 8 and in step 9. I'll flip over so you can see the pressing. Again, I'm just following the pressing throughout the pattern. We have just a few more steps to take to complete this block. First, we're going to sew these 2 pieces together. And you see that happening here in step number 10. And then in step 11, we are sewing together N, H, and M. All of those pieces get sewn together. And I'm going to sew those together as well as sew these together. And then we have just a couple more steps until our block is complete. Here's what we're working with at this point in time. You can really see this block starting to take shape. The last couple steps we need to do. First, sew these 2 pieces together. After we've sewn those together, we can sew our chimney section on top and then our grass section on the bottom. It's all we need to do, and our block is going to be complete. And there she is, our completed friendly neighbor block using a Bloom Fabrics. that is how you can make the block using the bloom panel square. It turns out super cute. And here you can see the difference in the panel size, and then how we adapted it to use that panel in place of the apricot and ash panel. Super easy to do, and then it really gives you a lot of different options for using that bloom panel. All right, so you say, hey, that is all fine and dandy, but I don't like house blocks, or I just finished a house quilt and I don't want to make another one, or what other options do we have for using that bloom panel? I've got a little stack of goodies here, and we'll just talk about some of the different ways that you can use this panel. So you saw that we can put it just in the center of quilt blocks. You saw how it works with 6.5 inches. If you needed just a 6.5 inch block, you wouldn't have to border it out. Now you also know how to border it out to an 8.5 inch size. So that would be finishing at 8 inches, or if you're cutting at 6.5 inches, that finishes at 6 inches. So if you are browsing on Pinterest, looking on the internet, and you see some other quilts made using panels, or just a solid piece of fabric in the center of a quilt block, all you have to do is know what that measurement is. Is it 6.5? Is it 8.5? Maybe it's even something like 7.5. It finishes at 7 inches for that center block. You can add borders, get it to the size that you need it, and utilize that panel in place of some really fun blocks for that center portion. Sawtooth stars specifically. Often, well, pretty much always, if you're making a 12-inch block size, a standard sawtooth star, that center square is cut at 6.5 inches. So that means you could make a whole quilt filled with sawtooth stars and use the bloom panel square in the center of each of your star blocks. So I just jotted down some quick measurements right here on this little illustration. Your center would be cut at 6.5 inches square. If you're doing the stitch and flip method of making flying geese, where you start with one rectangle and two squares, that would be a 3.5 by 6.5 inch rectangle. Your squares would be cut at 3.5 inches square, and your corner squares would also be cut at 3.5 inches square. Now, maybe you like doing the 4 at a time method for your flying geese. I really like this Ultimate Flying Geese tool. I have done a tutorial video using this tool for doing 4 at a time flying geese. If you're using that method, you can see here that for 3-inch by 6-inch finished flying geese, which is what we have right here, you would be cutting one larger square at 7 3/4 and your 4 smaller squares at 4 1/4. So that gives you an idea of how to approach sawtooth star block using panel for the center and then the measurements that you would need to complete that. So that would be one suggestion. Now, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I had been planning to share my down home quilt in this video, which was perfect to share Michael's down home quilt at the beginning. So this is down home. This is a $5 pattern over in my Etsy shop. It's a fun one to piece, a lot of hourglass blocks and squares. So I'm going to hold this up, and then I'm going to talk about how you could use the panel in a pattern like this. These original fabrics that I used were Sugar Creek, but of course there are so many beautiful fabric lines you could use. So let me lay this on the table here. Let's move some of this out of the road. Lay this up here. We just need to be able to see a portion of this quilt. So these are 6-inch squares. So this finishes at 6, this finishes at 6, finishes at 6. So what does that tell us? That means that we could cut our bloom panel at 6.5 inches square and use it in the centers of all of these Ohio stars if we wanted to. It would be an easy swap to make. Rather than doing the whole star in one print, you would use the print for your star points and then the bloom panel square for your centers. Just a really easy swap to make that would add a little something special if you wanted to. I think the quilt is beautiful like this too, but just gives you another option for using that panel. So that is an option. And now the rest of my stack here, I think, everything else I have here are free patterns over on my blog. I just went through and looked to see, hey, where did I use panels some other times, and how might we be able to swap out a bloom in some other options? So that's what I'm going to be sharing here. Okay. Up first, we have Granny's Stars. This was a free pattern that I released with Buttercup and Slate. I wanted something that would highlight the cheater fabric that I had in Buttercup and Slate, and so this was the quilt that I designed. Now you saw this print recently because I used it to finish that Socialites quilt a couple weeks ago. So you recently saw that Grandmother's Flower Garden print pop up. And now this was the free pattern I designed specifically showcasing that fabric. But when we take a look at this pattern, let's lay this out here. We are going to see that we are cutting for these star centers. You see these are basically a sawtooth star. They're constructed a little bit differently because we have our points made from a square rather than from a rectangle. But that center is still 6.5 inches. So that means if you wanted to, you could swap out all of these centers for 6.5 inch panel squares. Of course, you could always swap it out for solid fabric or, any number of things. But another way, a simple way to use that panel, just put them right in the center of all of these stars. And that is a free pattern. I'm going to link to all of these patterns that I'm mentioning. So whether it's Down Home, Friendly Neighbor, or any of these free ones that I have on my blog, so that if any of them catch your eye, whether you want to use the panel or you just want to make something fun, using it just as it is, you've got the option. Next up, this one is a quilt that I offered free when my Beautiful Day line of fabric came out. It's called Calico Check, and you see how those panels are highlighted in this quilt. Now this panel, the one I'm holding up, is the same size as this behind me. So these are both 8.5 inch. We need an 8.5 inch panel square to use in place of the panels here. Well, we just learned how to do that today. I showed you how to take that 6.5 inch, add borders to bring it up to 8.5 inch, and you can do the same thing for this pattern here. You can use the panels here in the darker spots, like what you see here. Alternatively, if you wanted to swap out and use them in the lighter spots for these sections, you could do that as well. But for this one, you would be starting with the 6.5 inch. You'd cut your bloom panel to 6.5 inch squares. You'd be adding those same borders that I showed you for the Friendly Neighbor tutorial. You'd add those same dimensions to bring your block up to 8.5 inches square, and then you can use them in this quilt. So another fun, simple option right here. And then the last one that I have to share, this is Good Hearted. This was a pattern that I utilized with my Sunny Side Up line of fabric. For this one, we are cutting our squares even bigger. So as you read down through this pattern, you're going to see we need 10.5 inch panel squares. So we're going to approach this the same way as we did with the 8.5 inch. We know that we need to add wider borders onto the sides of our panel to bring it up to size. As you are looking through a pattern, you might say to yourself, I don't know what measurements I would need to add to the sides of my panel to bring it up to size. Sometimes we just want to make a quick and easy project without doing a lot of math. So if you had a 6.5 inch panel square to start with, you knew you needed it to be at 10.5. You know it's going to be at least 2 inches on both sides to get it up, and then you know you're going to need some sort of a seam allowance. So you could easily start with 6.5. Just go ahead and add like a 3 inch or a 4 inch on this side, 3 or a 4 inch side strip on this side, do the same at the top and the bottom, and then trim it down to size to 10.5 inches. And you've never had to do any math. You didn't have to think a whole lot, and you can still make a quick and easy quilt. So it's very easy to make these bigger than we need them to be just by adding borders. I'm going to hold this one up. This one just uses the panel in 4 different spots. And this is a fun one. This is one quilt that we use a lot. It's the biggest of the ones that I've shown you. But it's a fat quarter quilt, and then it just pops those little panels in. There's just 4 spots. I'll lay the full picture back on my cutting table after I'm done holding this up so that you can see it a little bit better in its entirety. And I know that those words are sideways, but at least you still get a little bit of a peek at the quilt. I'll lay this there, and then I will put the pattern on there too. Okay, so that's what that looks like, and then this is what the full quilt looks like. It just has those panels tucked in just a couple spots there. All right, that's the last one I had to show you today. So I think that gives you a few different ideas, some fun, great free quilt patterns that you can use with or without panels, depending on your preferences, but maybe gets your wheels turning a little bit in some different ways that we can utilize panels. I know sometimes we see them and we think they're so pretty, but then we're like, what in the world would I ever use this for? I don't know how to use this in a quilt. But even aside from quilts, you can use panels in other small projects. I showed one in a project bag recently. Aprons are a great way to showcase them. Pillows, journal covers, pot holders, so many different ways we can use them. So if one does catch your eye and you're uncertain of how to use it, maybe just start thinking a little bit in different directions that you can take, different handmade goods that you might be able to showcase those fun fabrics that we all love collecting. If you have any questions, be sure to leave those for me in the description box below. I'll do my very best to answer them. I thank you so much for stopping by and spending a little bit of your morning with me. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the rest of your week.